Greetings all, and welcome to the final part of the third episode of the V.T.P. Let's take a final look at the moves lost by Pokemon over time, and see what final odd absences are present in this series so far. One of the most recent changes to occur among the movesets of many Pokemon has to do with the alterations made to the Leech Life attack in Generation 7. Prior to this generation, Leech Life was a fairly weak attack that restored some energy to the user based on the damage dealt by it, but it was so weak that it rarely did much good, so the majority of Pokemon that learned it did so near the start of their life cycle. However, in Generation 7, its base power was quadrupled from 20 to 80, making it a devastatingly powerful energy-draining attack by comparison. As a result of this, many Pokemon needed to have their movesets altered in order to keep them from learning such a powerful attack so early on in their life cycle. In most cases, this resulted in the move being completely replaced with the Absorb attack. This can be seen in the members of the Paris family, the Spinarak family, the Nincada family, Kricketune, the Joltik family, the Shelmet family, the Larvesta family, and the Noibat family. In at least one case though, it is noted that there is an additional alteration worth mentioning. With the members of the Zubat family, although they did have Leech Life replaced with Absorb, instead of losing access to the move entirely, they instead lost access to the Acrobatics attack, having it replaced with Leech Life and thus allowing them to retain access to the move, learning it at a much higher level. While this cuts off one of the better flying type attacks they could learn naturally, given that their entire life cycle revolves around draining the blood and vital fluids of other life forms for sustenance, allowing them to retain access to the now powerful attack makes sense, and provides them with a useful recovery move that they can rely on as a counter to the otherwise weak defensive stats, helped out by the fact that they can still learn Acrobatics via TM. In some cases, it can be seen that some Pokemon, over time, lose access to moves that they once had that is still retained within another stage of their evolution. While the normal act of balancing movesets can be partially blamed for this to some degree, it is also the case that this can be done to make the movesets of Pokemon more unique compared to other members of their evolutionary family. We have already covered some indirect examples, such as the members of the Ponyta family, but now, let's take a look at some examples where the effects were more permanent and noteworthy. First up, there is Persian, who lost access to the Payday attack starting in Generation 4, despite having it since Generation 1. The attack itself is not that powerful, and thus is not a significant loss to Persian, especially since they can gain access to the Power Gem attack in its place, but this is a fun case because it is their pre-evolved form, Meowth, that retains exclusive access to the move and not their evolved form, as is usually expected in these sorts of scenarios. This was done primarily to make it Meowth's signature attack, courtesy of the coin charm attached to their forehead, and thus helps them to stand out among the many other feline Pokemon that exist in the world, additionally making them one of the few ways that trainers can score a little bit of extra cash if they're having trouble besting opponents for prize money. Moving on onto a Bird Brain case, there is Doduo, who had access to the Tri-Attack move starting in Generation 1, but lost access to it starting in Generation 4. This was mainly done because their two heads are less suited for a triple-themed attack like Tri-Attack, while their evolved form Dodrio is more in line with the move, with it becoming a move that they now acquire immediately upon evolving from Doduo. In place of the move though, Doduo do gain access to the double hit attack, so it's not a complete loss on their part. Additionally, Doduo used to be able to learn the Sky Attack move via Move Tutor in Generation 3, but it was removed in succeeding generations, likely as a way to keep such a powerful attack reserved for an evolved Pokemon like Dodrio that can make better use of it. Gengar and their pre-evolved forms are known for being incredibly powerful special attackers, but in generations 1 and 2, they were even more powerful, as in those generations, all 3 members of the family could learn the Thunder attack via TM. However, starting in Generation 3, only Gengar retained access to the move through artificial means, with both Ghastly and Haunter losing access to it. This was likely done in order to keep them more balanced. Trading and thus some cooperative effort is needed to get these creatures fully evolved into Gengar, so having access to stronger moves is a nice reward, and it makes it more fair for those involved in the trading, as it means that not just any trainer can give their weaker evolutions access to the same powerful attacks with little consequence. Sometimes, effort needs to be rewarded, and this is a case where the very moveset accessibility of a Pokemon pays off in spades as a result of said effort. Some shenanigans can be observed in Generation 1 with the fossil Pokemon families of the generation, Ammonite and Kabuto. In the case of both of these creatures, they initially had access to a move that was more iconic among their evolved forms, but later lost access to it in order to create a greater incentive and benefit to evolving them. In the case of Ammonite, they once had access to the Spike Cannon attack in Generation 1, but lost it in Generation 2, with it exclusively being learned by their evolved form, Omastar, and acquired immediately after they evolved. In the case of Kabuto, the attack in question is Slash, which they also lost access to in Generation 2, only being accessible to Kabutops immediately after evolving. Togetic, much like Doduo, once had the ability to learn the Sky Attack move via Move Tutor, but they lost access to it starting in Generation 4. Much as with Doduo, this is because the move is much better suited for a fully evolved Pokemon like Togekiss. In fact, Togekiss actually learned the move naturally, so that alone is perfect evidence behind the logic in removing it from Togetic's move list. While they shared similar move lists for a time, the members of the Phanpy family today are quite different from each other in terms of the moves that Phanpy and Donphan learn now. As a result of this, Donphan used to have access to both the Odor Sleuth and Flail moves starting in Generations 3 and 2, respectively. However, as their move list started to change to reflect their different biological states, Donphan lost access to the Odor Sleuth technique as soon as they gained it, losing it in Generation 4, while Flail stuck around a bit longer and was only lost in Generation 5. This was all done again as a way of helping to differentiate the two biologically, and helps to show the rewards and negative consequences that will come to trainers in choosing to stick with one or the other. Blaziken used to have access to the Mirror Move technique in Generation 3, but they lost natural access to it starting in Generation 4. This was likely done in order to help differentiate them from their pre-evolved forms and to further complement their offensive prowess. While Torchic and Combusken very much still resemble birds in form and in turn can learn the move, Blaziken possess much less avian bodies in terms of their overall bodily structure, and the loss of the move doesn't do them a lot of harm since it is replaced with the Brave Bird attack, a powerful physical attack that is much more reflective of their brawler nature and thus plays to their strengths much more effectively than the Mirror Move technique, making its replacement a tremendous benefit to them as a whole. Marshtomp and Swampert used to be able to learn the Mud Sport technique in Generation 3, but they lost access to it in Generation 4, making it exclusive to Mudkip in the family. This makes sense because both Marshtomp and Swampert are partial ground types, so they really have no need to weaken the power of electric type moves with a technique under normal circumstances, resulting in it being replaced with the Mud Bomb attack. Mudkip, on the other hand, do still need it, as they are pure water types, making its isolation to them in the family logical and understandable. Poochyena used to gain access to the Thief attack naturally, but they lost this power in Generation 4 when it became exclusive in their family to their evolved form, Mightyena. While it can still get the move via TM, it is likely that this change occurred as a reflection of the fact that Poochyena are actually quite kind and playful creatures towards all types of people, unlike their far more malicious and unforgiving evolved form, making an attack like Thief seem improper for them to have natural access to. In Generation 3, when the members of the Trapinch family were first introduced, all three members of the family had the ability to learn the Bite and Crunch attacks. However, following the introduction of Generation 4, both Vibrava and Flygon lost access to these attacks, leaving Trapinch as the only one that could naturally learn them. The notable lack of powerful jaws within Trapinch's evolutions is the likely culprit behind the otherwise strange inconsistency, and it fits the unusual biology of Trapinch compared to the evolved forms. Sadly, this means that some of the best physical attacks the family can access are locked behind these little monsters, but for those that are willing to be patient and wait some time before evolving them to get access to these moves, the wait can often be worth it. While it might seem a bit odd at first, while Snorunt used to be able to learn the Ice Beam attack naturally in Generation 3, starting in Generation 4, this capacity was stripped of them and awarded exclusively to Glalie, one of their evolved forms. This was initially meant to separate the two in terms of power and clearly demonstrate which one was the superior ice type, but this loss actually has an interesting twist to it, as Glalie lost the ability to learn the attack naturally in Generation 6, though they could still learn the move via TM, having it replaced with the Frost Breath attack, which they eventually acquired immediately after evolution. It's a bit odd that Frostlass didn't receive a similar treatment in some fashion, but then again, looking at Frostlass, it's probably odd enough of an evolution as it is. Bonsly, though incredibly cute to many, are still deceptively powerful little creatures and can definitely make their presence known in battle, especially in Generations 4 and 5 when they had access to the Slam attack. However, they lost access to the move in Generation 6, the move becoming exclusive to Sudowoodo. This makes some sense if you take a good look at their natural biology and the way the Slam attack is executed. Normally, the Slam attack involves slamming part of one's body, like a tail or limb, onto an opponent harshly. Sudowoodo are perfectly suited for this attack, since the bulbs on their arms are actually made out of solid rock. But Bonsly? Well, they don't really have any notable limbs to speak of aside from their small feet. As such, it makes sense that they would have to wait until they grow up and evolve before their bodies are able to actually execute the move in the fashion it was designed for. Lucario once shared with their pre-evolved form, Riolu, the ability to learn the Force Palm attack naturally, but eventually lost access to it starting in Generation 6. On the one hand, the Force Palm attack is a decently powerful attack with a high chance of inflicting paralysis, which makes it unique out of all fighting type attacks, so the loss is a bit sad. However, this loss is not completely undeserved, as it got replaced with a more interesting power-up punch attack with Lucario, giving them a decent attack at a young age that can help make them even more physically daunting over time, and in turn serve them well as powerful offensive fighters. Next, and as the last major grouping to be covered in this episode, sometimes, even with deep consideration and analysis, there are some moves that are removed from a Pokemon's move repertoire for the simple reason that they don't make any sense and really don't belong in a specific Pokemon's moveset. In cases like this, it can be very difficult to say why exactly the moves were a part of a set originally, but at the very least, they add a bit of unique flavor to these creatures and can make some observers scratch their heads in confusion so much that it becomes amusing to others. In Generation 2, for some odd reason, Bulbasaur was able to acquire the Razor Wind attack as an egg move, but lost access to it starting in Generation 3. Some might be willing to point to the one time that a Bulbasaur used Whirlwind in the anime as a clue to the reasoning why the move was made accessible to them, and since the move was not accessible as a TM anymore in Generation 2, it made it one of the few Pokemon that can get the move new in Generation 2, but it's still an odd addition that was rightfully removed in time so the creature's moveset made more sense. The same can be said for Totodile, which underwent a similar change with the same move. Looking at Squirtle, it can be seen that they had the abnormal capacity to learn the Confusion attack as an egg move in Generation 2, but ultimately lost access to it immediately afterward in Generation 3. There is little to say regarding the reasoning behind the inclusion of the move in the first place, sadly, and while it might prove to be a unique surprise to some, As a whole, it really doesn't belong among Pokemon like the members of the Squirtle family, and it's rightfully okay to not have as part of their move repertoire anymore. In Generation 2, the members of the Mankey family used to have access to the Psych-Up technique via TM, and obviously lost access to it when the TM was discontinued, but they strangely never regained access to it at a later point in time, despite the TM being reintroduced later on. Primeape in particular are decent fighters, but not strong enough for such a move to be completely broken when utilized by them, so it's unknown why they would be denied access to it once more, though it might have something to do with the fact that their incredible anger and fury would logically make it unlikely for them to be able to copy the mannerisms and stat changes of others when their anger is all they can focus on. In Pokemon Crystal, Cyndaquil used to have access to the submission attack as an egg move, but lost it immediately in Generation 3. On the one hand, it could be thought that this move was included to give the family a natural counter to Rock-type Pokemon to some degree, but they could also learn Reversal as an egg move for the same purpose, so as a whole, its inclusion is more than a bit odd, and its removal probably for the best. Marill, of all Pokemon, seems like an odd choice to have the Foresight technique associated with, but in Generation 2, they did have access to it as an egg move. Why it was there at all remains to be seen, but it definitely was an interesting addition before it was removed from their moveset in Generation 3. Hoppip are definitely odd Pokemon to say the least, and they have had some equally odd moves over the years. Two particular examples are the Growl and Payday moves, which they had as egg moves in Generation 2 before losing them in Generation 3. Why Growl was lost in Generation 3 seems apparent as, well, they're plants, despite the animalistic form that likely led to them having the move in the first place. As for Payday, I'm really not sure myself, outside of the fact that dandelions, which they are partially based off of, are associated with luck in some cultures, and even that might be a bit of a stretch. Murkrow used to have access to the Quick Attack move in Generation 2 as an egg move, but lost it immediately in Generation 3. While crows might be decently fast flyers, speed is not exactly something that is immediately associated with the Murkrow family, so it at least makes some sense as to why they lost access to the move so soon after they gained initial access to it. Remoraid and Octillery are known for having a fairly unorthodox list of moves available to them both naturally and artificially, but for a time in Generation 3, Remoraid had access to Thunder Wave as an egg move. I mean, in all honesty, even this one is baffling to me outside of a taser joke, since it isn't an energy beam based attack of any sort, so its removal from their egg move list in Generation 4 was likely the best decision that could have been made. Lombre used to have access to the Thief attack in Generation 3, a move that really only makes sense if one considers the fact that they are based on the Kappa, which are more than known for having extremely mischievous personalities, making such a move a shoo-in for them. However, given that this basis might not be initially apparent to all people, plus the fact that they are still more well known for their natural grass and water-type powers, it makes at least a little sense why this reference was rethought and the attack removed from their natural move repertoire in Generation 4. Still though, it was a nice nod towards their origins, though, given the types of inappropriate mischievous activities Kappa are known for, perhaps removing this move, and thus a reason for kids to search up the truth about them, was for the best. At one point, Nosepass used to have the ability to learn the Head Smash attack as an egg move in Heart Gold and Soul Silver in Generation 4, but lost it just as quickly when Generation 5 debuted. Now, in all honesty, these creatures are more than capable of using this move, so its removal seems a bit odd at first. However, there is actually a very good reason for it being removed, and it's quite funny. While they could learn the move as an egg move, there were no Pokemon compatible with them in their egg group that actually had access to the move in any way, nor could it be chain-bred onto them. And if there's no way for them to truly obtain the move, well, then there's really no reason for them to have access to it in the first place. Deoxys' speed form is incredibly interesting in regards to lost moves, as in Generation 3, it had the ability to learn the Icy Wind attack via Move Tutor. However, for reasons that are still not incredibly clear, it lost the capacity to learn this move immediately in Generation 4. Considering that Deoxys is able to learn a great variety of different elemental damage dealing attacks, the loss of this one move is a bit odd. But considering just how incredibly fast Speed Form Deoxys actually is, it's possible that the developers didn't see a reason to allow it to retain a move that is mainly used for lowering a target's speed and little more. Maybe not the most supportive of explanations from the perspective of what they are capable of truly learning, but sometimes these things just happen the way they do. The above entries sort of help to prove that point. Alright, let's take a final look at some special examples of lost moves among Pokémon. In Generation 1, the members of the Ammonite family strangely had access to the Horn Attack move. This was likely due to the fact that Omastar have spikes on their shell, and thus could be thought to be usable as a blunt force weapon. Unfortunately, their limited movement speeds and the fact that they can attack in close quarters directly with their shell, as the spines are on the back of their shell, Spike Cannon being the only logical exception, it makes plenty of sense then as to why it was removed from their natural learned move list starting in Generation 2. Similarly, in Generation 1, the members of the Kabuto family had access to the Hydro Pump attack naturally, but lost it immediately in Generation 2. In their debut generation, this was needed in their moveset as it was the only water-type move they learned naturally, so it was the only way they could naturally get any stab moves to work with. Moreover, since their counterparts in the Ammonite family had access to the attack, it also made sense then for Kabuto and Kabutops to have it as well. However, it probably didn't take long for the developers to realize that this move made very little sense given the natural biology of these creatures, resulting in it being removed immediately in the next generation. It is further noted that in Generation 3, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, Kabutops could naturally learn the Fury Cutter attack with a bit of help, but they lost it in Generation 4. Oddly enough, it is uncertain why this move was removed, as it fits perfectly with the biology and mannerisms of these creatures, but it's possible that it may have simply been swept out as a way of resetting the awkward changes that had been made to the movesets of many Pokémon within those two particular games. The members of the Hoot Hoot family used to be able to learn the Flash technique in Generations 2 and 3, but they lost access to it when it was discontinued as an HM, and never regained the ability to learn it again, even as a TM. It's likely that they were able to learn the move before as a result of them being infamous for being able to not only use psychic power, but also as a reflection of the way that their foresight technique was displayed in the anime originally, like a beacon of light that can unveil ghosts, hence why Flash seemed like a natural shoo-in for the family. Sadly, anime depictions do not dictate everything, and considering that it makes little sense biologically for them to have access to the move, its removal seems to have been a fair choice. Along with the loss of the Leech Life attack, the members of the Spinarak family originally had natural access to the Screech technique, which likely existed as a supplement to their physical offenses, especially since the family did not originally gain access to very many powerful damaging attacks. However, given that they are unable to use any other type of sound-based move naturally, plus the fact that they are more about stealth in capturing and eating prey than they are about scaring others with noises, it makes sense why such a loud move would make so little sense to have on such stealthy creatures, making its removal from their learned move list and replacement with the agility technique starting in Pokemon Crystal understandable. The members of the Snubbull family had access to the takedown attack starting in their debut generation, Generation 2, up through Generation 5 before it was removed in Generation 6. It makes sense why they might have access to the move given their brutal and seemingly vicious outer appearances, but in all reality, these creatures simply don't have the heart to execute such attacks. Despite their appearances, these creatures are really not that dangerous as a whole, and generally tend to be rather gentle, so having a brutish attack like Takedown doesn't quite fit them, especially following their reclassification as fairy types in Generation 6. The same logic can be applied to their capacity to learn the Leer technique as an egg move in Generation 2 before it was removed in Generation 3. Corsola used to have access to Safeguard as an egg move in Generation 2, but lost it immediately afterwards in Generation 3. This is a basic case of redundancy since they could gain access to the move via TM, though given their defensive nature, why they can't learn the move naturally is a bit odd, even to me. While their pre-evolved form, Scyther, might be well known for their speed and incredible agility, Scizor are not, instead being more well known for their strong defenses and pure offensive power. As such, it made little sense for these creatures to retain access to the double team technique that is more suited for their pre-evolved form. This is likely the reasoning behind why, while Scizor had access to the move starting in Generation 2 and part of Generation 3, they lost it in Fire Red and Leaf Green, having it instead replaced with the more appropriate Iron Defense technique. With that move on their side, Scizor can make themselves incredibly hard to damage in a close quarters brawl and a nearly unstoppable force. Provided they don't get lit on fire, that is. Teddiursa are well known for looking incredibly adorable and using those looks to hide their deceptively powerful physical offenses. To some degree, this helps to explain why they had access to the Leer technique starting in their debut in Generation 2, especially when there really wasn't anything else that fit them well. However, in Generation 6, it was replaced with the Baby Doll Eyes technique, which has the same general effect, but in terms of execution, matches the personality and mannerisms of Teddiursa much more closely, making it a worthwhile replacement. At the same time, these creatures once had access to the Focus Energy technique in Generation 2 as an egg move, but lost it in Generation 3. Considering that they and their evolved form, Ursaring, are impressive physical fighters, the loss of such a devastating move in practice is probably one that helped some sleep better at night, and in turn represents the reasoning behind its loss. While it might seem incredibly bizarre and pointless, it is noted that in Pokemon Crystal, Phanpy had the unusual ability to learn the Water Gun attack as an egg move. Now, on the one hand, they are based off of elephants, and elephants are known for sucking up and spraying water out of their trunks when bathing or trying to cool themselves off, so this inclusion makes some sense from that perspective. However, as far as being a Pokemon and being able to actually learn the move, yeah, there isn't much there to support it, hence why it was immediately removed from their move repertoire in Generation 3. Hitmontop stand out from the rest of the Tyrogue family for their abnormal technical finesse and unique moveset, and at one time, this was even more so when they had access to the Drill Run attack via Move Tutor in Generation 5. While this initially made sense, as they do have a sharp horn on their head and can utilize attacks like Dig, the problem here is that the Drill Run attack requires a fairly long and razor-sharp pointed appendage and the capacity to launch it forcefully to work. In this case, while the point on the heads of these creatures are relatively sharp, they would still need to be able to launch their entire body in a drilling motion head first to really use the move. And seeing as their body isn't really designed to do that, being made more for balance than anything else, it would be very hard for them to pull off this move realistically, making its removal from their moveset understandable from a practical standpoint. Suicune represent a unique case in that they were the first legendary Pokemon to have their moveset changed to fit a new role in a new version of a game in the same generation. In Pokemon Gold and Silver, where they first debuted, Suicune had access to the Water Gun and Roar moves, which matched up with the other members of the legendary Beast trio. However, when they became the focus of Pokemon Crystal and were made a standing encounter instead of a roaming encounter, these moves were deemed pointless for them as they took a larger role in the story, instead gaining access to the Bubble Beam and Rain Dance moves respectively. This actually helps Suicune out a lot, as Bubble Beam is a stronger move as a whole, and support from Rain Dance helps to make up for Suicune's lower offensive stats, overall making them better fighters and a noticeable threat to anyone without access to water-resistant defenses. While Plusle and Minun are generally considered by some to basically be carbon copies of each other, there are some differences in their stats and moves, and this was especially made the case in Generation 6 in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, where they each lost access to a move each. On the one hand, Plusle lost access to the Fake Tears technique, making it exclusive to Minun, while Minun lost access to the Charm technique, making it exclusive to Plusle. At the very least, small changes like this, even after nearly 3 generations after their debut, help to set these two apart and give them a slightly distinct feeling compared to how similar they are otherwise. It is interesting to note that Torkoal once had the ability to learn the Earthquake attack as an egg move in Generation 4, only to lose access to it immediately in Generation 5. This does make at least some sense, considering that they really don't have the body mass nor the biological ability to use the move naturally, seeing as they have to remain on all fours to move and can't effectively lift their bodies even partially off of the ground to attack. Special training and artificial assistance via TM is the only way to get past this issue, which in turn makes the removal of the move one of redundancy as well, seeing as Torkoal could easily just be taught the move via TM. The Weather Trio as a whole have only managed to become more powerful as the generations have passed, but it is interesting to note that they have lost a few moves as well over time in order to help refine their powers, with these particular refinements all coming in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Kyogre used to have access to the Rest technique in Generations 3 and 4, but lost it in the above-mentioned games. The move was probably seen as inappropriate for the creature because, since it has remained pretty much active after being reawakened in the Hoenn region so many years ago, plus it's swimming at an almost constant basis, taking the time to rest probably isn't an option, helping to explain why it was swapped out for Water Spout instead. In the case of Groudon, it used to have access to the Slash attack during those same generations, which gave it a decent basic attack to work with, but this was replaced because Groudon really doesn't use its large claws to attack that much, preferring to control the earth around and below it to attack, and having the move replaced with the more physically appropriate and powerful Hammer Arm attack. Lastly, in Generations 3 and 4, Rayquaza used to have access to the Dragon Claw attack, which acted as its basic staple damaging move in those generations. However, seeing as Rayquaza's claws are fairly small, it doesn't make a lot of sense for it to be actively using those claws to attack, seeing as that might require it to get close to an opponent to attack, and even then, executing the move would be a clumsy affair with such small claws. As such, replacing it with Hyper Voice in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, a move that calls back to its power to calm Kyogre and Groudon with its roar alone, was a logical and sound decision to make, especially since it eventually got access to strong stab moves in Outrage and Dragon Pulse later on anyways. Lucario once had access to the Dark Pulse attack in Generations 4 and 5, but lost access to it in Generation 6. To be fair, the fact that these creatures had access to the move in the first place is highly abnormal, as it is a Dark-type move. In Japan, the Dark-type is known as the Evil type, so to have such a move on a noble creature like Lucario just doesn't make a lot of sense. It worked quite well as a counter against Psychic types, but sadly, it just didn't mix well with the creature's mental stance and was thus a deserved removal. Interestingly, Porygon Z once had access to the Wonder Room technique via Move Tutor, but lost it immediately in Generation 6. Why exactly this was the case is still not understood, nor is the reason why it had access to the move in the first place, so yeah, this one is an odd case to be sure. Then again, everything about Porygon Z is abnormal, so chalk this one up to the effects of infecting a working program with malware. Okay, this is one that actually defies logic to me. In Generation 6, Chespin and Quilladin had access to the Tackle attack, but lost it completely in Generation 7. For one thing, this removes their primary basic attack, and while as compensation they get early access to the Vine Whip attack, this still seems like an incredibly odd choice. What compounds this mystery is the fact that Fennekin and Froakie, the other starter Pokemon of Generation 6, still retain access to their basic starting moves of Scratch and Pound, respectively. So why exactly was Tackle removed from the moveset of Chespin and Quilladin? And more importantly, why was it not removed from Chestnut's moveset? In all honesty, I think that this might actually be an error on the part of the developers, or an oversight of some sort. The answer will likely be revealed in Generation 8, so we'll have to keep an eye on the family's movesets to see what changes, if any, come with time. And lastly, here at the very end, we come to the legendary Pokemon Zygarde. In Generation 6, Zygarde had access to the Dragon Dance and Extreme Speed moves, but completely lost them in Generation 7 without any form of replacement at all. In this unique case though, the moves were not completely lost, as they were given to Zygarde as some of the potential moves that it could inherit from the collectible Zygarde cores in Sun and Moon. This seems to have been designed as part of the gimmick of obtaining Zygarde with Power Construct, as a way of introducing some extra strategy to use in battle when designing a set for Zygarde, and for giving a greater incentive to find as many of the cores and cells as possible. Even so, the gimmick was not completely well received, and it's possible that changes might be made in the future, but even so, Zygarde still stands as a formidable force, and one that can definitely prove to be a powerful weapon in the right hands. At long last, we have reached the very end of this lengthy episode of the V.T.P. Tune in next time for a new episode, and keep on looking harder than ever at the unique intricacies within the world of Pokemon and the work that has been put into making it a fascinating and exciting world to explore. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokemon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter, where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description.
Yep, no.
With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.